If we face the same problems daily in our work or in our personal lives, it's a good indication that there's a system in place that is causing that problem repeatedly. Strategic thinking enables us to recognize what Peter Drucker called the symptom of the recurring crisis. Now, we can unwind the problem and we can tackle the underlying systemic issue that vexes us. We can even construct our own conscious systems to solve the systemic problem that leads to the recurring crisis. This method has applications across a range of fields, from business to the military. Anywhere recurring patterns of behavior can be identified. Now, when introducing the notion of a systemic problem in my classes, I pose this question. Who has experienced the problem of finding misplaced car keys in the morning when you're about to leave for school or for work? Almost everyone raises a hand in recognizing this universal malady. And you solve the problem by finding your keys after a 10-minute search. If we are truly rational human beings who value our time and who don't enjoy looking for car keys every morning, this problem should happen only once. But for my students, it happens repeatedly. So I ask my class to think to the moment they unlock their apartment door in the evening and step over the threshold. Ask yourself this question. Do my keys have to go into this disaster area called an apartment where they're bound to get lost? Do my keys perform any valuable function for me at all in this apartment? If the answer is no, and it should be no, then those keys should stay there, right beside the door. So, let's drive a nail in the wall, about eye level, and every day we hang our keys beside the door when we come home. We have just created an orderly, logical system that has solved the problem of lost keys. We just replaced a dysfunctional system with a functional system. We've just solved a systemic problem. It was a famous American statesman from more than 5 decades ago who described this phenomenon of the nail by the door. John Foster Dulles was President Eisenhower's Secretary of State, famous for much, much more than the remark I cite here. But there is perhaps no better and more succinct formulation of the plague of the systemic problem, the chronic pain that surfaces again and again. The key, or your glasses, or a valuable piece of information that you've misplaced, lost once again. Dulles said this, "The measure of success is not whether you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it's the same problem you had last year, or the same problem you have every morning." A systemic problem is a problem that arises repeatedly because of the interactions or processes or the system in place. The system may even have been designed to do something else. It may have been designed to produce an outcome different than what we're looking for. Now let's remember that everyone does not think alike. Not all people attack problems the same way. Many people never talk about systems. Instead, some people see the world holistically as an interconnected organism, and some people see the world in spiritual terms. Others see it as an atomistic collection of rational choice actors. An artist looks at a landscape and frames the scene for painting, noting the colors, both lush and subtle. A biologist sees that same landscape as a complex ecosystem. A soldier sees cover and concealment and avenues of approach. A developer sees possibilities for urban expansion. Frankly, it can take a long time to understand that there are many different ways of viewing a situation. And this largely depends upon your personal experience, your education, your history, your intellectual makeup, and whether or not you've been exposed to any or many problem-solving methods. What to one person seems obvious, to another person seems alien. But the notion of systems can be quite flexible. It can be adapted to many points of view, both large and small. Now let's break down exactly what we mean by system, especially in the sense of strategic analysis. Then we can look at some examples of systemic dysfunction. Systemic dysfunction happens when we expect certain outcomes from a system that's designed to yield a different outcome. When we find ourselves in such a fix, we should focus on the system, not on the bad result. A system is a collection. It's a collection of people, processes, and things that interact with each other. They form an integrated whole. Systems have structure, they have behavior, and interdependence, and most of them generate results or outputs. Think of the solar system of its planets, asteroids, and central star. Think of the complex pattern of traffic lights in a huge metropolis like New York. Our world is composed of systems, both involving us and external to us. Systems interconnect, and they depend on each other to function. Consider the systems around us that support us. Garbage collection, food distribution, public transportation, fuel for automobiles, electrical grids, police protection, manufacturing assembly lines, the legal system, cell phones, water recycling and purification. Think now of nature's systems, the ecosystem around you. Even popular movies pay homage to the notion of the system. Think of The Lion King's Circle of Life. Everything in our world happens in the context of a system. One action in one part of a system cascades throughout the system. We create systems either consciously or unconsciously. We tap into existing systems. We link our systems together and we utilize them without even seeing them. Too often we don't see systems, we simply have expectations. We expect the bus to be on time. We expect water to flow from the tap every time we twist it. We expect bread to be on the shelves when we visit the store. And this is fine most of the time. But it pays to think of our systems. It pays to consider our most important systems and how they might be hurting us. The nail where we hang our keys is an example of replacing an inappropriate system that delivers bad outcomes with an efficient system that delivers for you the desired outcome. And if you happen to be someone who loses keys often, the new system is incredibly valuable. It can give back to you between 1 and 2 hours per week, not to mention the reduction in stress. Now, one of the most innovative thinkers about strategy and systems is John A. Warden III, a former Air Force general and architect of the highly successful air war against Iraq in the First Gulf War. Some consider Warden one of the premier strategic thinkers of the last century in the realm of air power. Much of Warden's focus was on systems, how to develop them, and how to attack enemy systems successfully. Well, we're not interested in attacking anyone else's systems right now. We're concerned with understanding our own and how to improve them. Warden shows us a way. Warden recognized the essential sameness of all systems. His systems approach is applicable regardless of the type of system, because the great thing about systems is they all exhibit system characteristics. Whether a living body, an industrialized state, a drug cartel, or an electric company, every system follows the same organizational scheme. In Warden's view, every system has 5 essential components, and he suggests thinking of those as concentric circles. Now, at the center is a leader. Next to that is a conversion process that provides food or energy or fuel to keep the system going. Next, moving outward, is infrastructure, such as blood vessels, roads, or transmission lines. And in the next ring comes the entire population. And finally, the outer layer surrounding all the others are the action units, which could be anything from antibodies in biology to police officers or to maintenance and repair workers. John Warden showed imaginatively how each of these seemingly dissimilar areas could be regarded as systems that share important commonalities. This approach gives us a great way to categorize information and compare seemingly disparate systems with each other. What is the purpose of the system that you're considering? What is the end result we strive for? Does our system deliver that result, or is our system delivering something else, totally unexpected and unacceptable? Now, we often look for answers not at the systemic level, but inside the system, at its components, and we may find that the components of the system are superb and functioning exactly as they're supposed to. But the system result, the overall result, is useless. So think now of our systems, the ones that impact us, the systems we control. Define that system's scope and extent. Identify the components. Ask yourself, what is that system supposed to provide? I mean really provide. Examine the incentive drivers throughout the system. Evaluate whether they truly incentivize people to do what you want them to. Recognize that you'll find systems that sometimes yield bad outcomes. Resources are squandered solving the same problem repeatedly. The symptoms are addressed each time they arise. Sometimes a problem isn't even recognized as such. Instead, it's viewed as a normal state of affairs, as if things couldn't get any better. Sometimes the systemic problem is created by something that is mistakenly regarded as beneficial. Here's an example. I'm a business presentations coach. I coach teams of MBA students who compete against other teams in analyzing a business case, and they then present their results. I see lots of presentations. Ever wonder why so many presentations, lectures, and after-dinner speeches are so bad? There's often a systemic reason for it, a systemic problem. For example, I'm asked to speak on occasion, and sometimes the organization wants a lot of control over my talk, including how I give it and what handouts are distributed and when. In fact, steering committees often try to turn my talk into their notion of what constitutes a good presentation by giving me strong suggestions that they believe are quite good, but which actually violate fundamental speaking precepts. As a result, they turn every talk into an imitation of every other talk. They channel speakers into the same dull routine. And they do this with the idea that they add value to the process. But in reality, the steering committee perpetuates bad presentations under the guise of improving them, a systemic problem. Now, systemic problems can afflict even the biggest, smartest companies, even a smart company like IBM, especially big companies like IBM. In 1999, the chairman of IBM was Lou Gerstner, and he was confronted with a perplexing situation. He guided the world's largest information technology company with more than 320,000 employees and revenues of more than $91 billion, and he had just brought the company out of a difficult period. After 6 years of cost-cutting and retooling, the company was strong, but its growth was slowing, and it was missing business opportunities right and left, from life sciences to computing, to the explosive growth in open-source software, to the development of handheld and mobile computing devices. The IT world seemed to be passing the aging giant. And this was quite odd because from 1993 to 1999, IBM won more patents than any other American company, an astounding 12,773. But leveraging these patents into new businesses, almost non-existent. IBM had the finest minds, the strongest financial position, a superb brand, leading market share across a range of products and services, but new business ventures were absent. And in fact, Gerstner discovered that internal new business ventures that he had engineered himself at startup were canceled by unknown forces so as to meet quarterly earnings goals. Gerstner suspected that the wrong incentives might be in place. So Gerstner directed a task force that investigated for 3 months, and they found the root of the problem. The task force met with Gerstner in December of 1999, and the results were painful. So painful that Mike Giersch, vice president of corporate strategy, said that, quote, "We had to admit that we had screwed things up." IBM's sharp focus on achieving short-term profitability had engendered strategic myopia throughout the firm. Managers simply were not incentivized to spot emerging growth opportunities. Top management also created a climate of fear with its demands for fact-based analysis and detailed financial forecasts. All but the most reckless managers would shun the uncertainty and risk of investing in a new business. This was the heart of the problem. The system penalized new ventures. Disincentives kept anyone from participating in them. Top management wanted investment in new businesses, but the system it fed was not equipped to deliver that output. The system was designed to deliver something else: stability, sobriety. Here was an archetypal systemic problem. If an executive finally did plunge in to launch a new business, the startup was burdened with the same expectations for near-term earnings as were IBM's billion-dollar legacy businesses. New business programs had to promise impossibly ambitious financial returns. The targets, of course, were never met, and the startup's budget would be quickly slashed. Moreover, the task force found the obvious. Top flight talent wanted nothing to do with these new business boondoggles. Most aspiring managers avoided the risk of new business ventures in favor of building their careers within the IBM mainstream. And who could blame them? Gerstner and his deputies, they wondered what could be done to help new business teams intercept fast-moving opportunities, but without disrupting IBM's smooth-running profit machine. Gerstner could have tried a classic top-down authoritarian solution. He could have opted for a quick fix. In a show of machismo, he could have ordered a change in results without diagnosing the problem, without recognizing that the system of incentives was at fault. But he did the smartest and toughest thing a CEO can do. He showed guts. Gerstner recognized that the system would have to be changed for the problem to be solved. And IBM accepted the challenge of inventing an entirely new and far-reaching management process. It took 5 years. IBM developed a new management program called the Emerging Business Opportunities Process to change the incentive structure. It launched in 2000. And in the program's first 5 years, IBM launched 22 successful new businesses with a total of $15 billion in annual revenues by the end of 2005. Systemic problem solved. And from this example, we take a powerful lesson. To tackle a systemic problem, you must understand its deep roots. Without understanding the systemic nature of the problem, any solution will be misdirected. Thinking back to our lost key example at the beginning of our lecture, we could easily misdirect our efforts to supposedly more efficient ways of searching for our keys. We might even allot 15 additional flex minutes in the morning to search for the keys, which we inevitably lose. But these high-cost, repetitive solutions can be obviated by attacking the systemic nature of the problem and solving that. Here's another example. Consider the case of Jeff Severts, a vice president at Best Buy, a leading consumer electronics retailer. As a vice president in advertising, Severts recognized that his reputation was linked to an internal system of monthly sales performance measured against the firm's financial forecasting. Sometimes they met the forecast, sometimes not. It seemed to Severts capricious, and he was stung by the criticism when they fell short. But fell short of what? Severts looked hard at the forecast system, and he saw that the forecasts weren't very good. In fact, they were awful, and many people knew it. Instead of giving up at that point, Severts examined the system components, how the company assembled its sales forecast. He discovered that expert merchant teams would err by as much as 10%, even when looking out just 30 days. Severts found that many factors degraded Best Buy's forecasts. The forecasting was entwined with many key management systems, including budget, performance measurement, compensation, and purchasing, each of them with an agenda that yielded forecasts wide of the mark. So what to do? Severts realized that he couldn't take on senior management and a host of clerk types invested in the current system. But he could work within his own bailiwick, which was the gift card business within Best Buy. The answer came to him while hearing a talk by James Surowiecki, the New Yorker business columnist whose book, The Wisdom of Crowds, was a bestseller. Surowiecki argued that large groups of people are often smarter than the smartest people in them. When it comes to predicting events that are driven by confusing variables, a diverse group of nominally informed individuals often has an advantage over a few experts. A crowd has access to the usual sorts of corporate reporting data, but it can also leverage information that never shows up in a formal report. And a crowd is immune to the systematic biases that skewed Best Buy's internal forecasts. In early 2005, Severance tested his idea in his own department of Best Buy's billion-dollar gift card business. He called for emailed forecast estimates from 190 employees across his business. The only incentive to participate was the chance to win a $50 gift certificate, which he paid for personally. His own small official team's projections were usually off by 5%. In the test, the gift card sales were audited and finalized, and Severance found that the team's estimate was indeed off by the usual 5%. And what of the crowd's average estimate? It was off by less than 0.5%. The crowd's forecast was 10 times more accurate than that of the experts. Severance had managed to tap into information inside the organization and set up a system that yielded better results than the formalized company system. You might think that this revelation was greeted with applause. Of course not. Entrenched interests never go quietly when it's their time to go. So Severance set up another test, this time against Best Buy's vaunted merchant teams. It was the rabble versus the oracles. More than 350 people submitted estimates of holiday sales for Thanksgiving 2005. And the final audit results showed that the official merchant's preseason forecast was 93% accurate. The crowd's forecast, on the other hand, which had also been made 4 months prior to the holiday season, it was 99.9% accurate. This finally got senior management attention in a positive way, and Severance was given the go-ahead to conduct more crowd wisdom experiments company-wide. In this case, Severance discovered the systemic problem was the method of forecasting, which yielded bad results. He discovered that the incentives within the system guaranteed that the forecasts would be skewed in ways having nothing to do with the actual sales performance, but having much to do with individual careers. Severance's solution bypassed this dysfunctional system. It tapped into more objective information provided by people with very little personal stake in the forecast. Here's another trio of examples, each of which happens to come from abroad. They show how imagination and business acumen can solve systemic problems in ways that not only earn a company profits, but can save lives and improve the standard of living for hundreds of thousands of people. In India, many problems faced by this dynamic developing nation are systemic in nature. These problems can be grouped into clusters. The problems belonging to each cluster can be traced to a single malady that, if corrected, would solve all of the subsidiary problems in the cluster at once. So these are systemic problems involving disease and malnutrition. Disease and malnutrition afflict most of rural India. I visited one Indian village outside of the south-central city of Hyderabad. The Baraju Foundation targeted disease control in this small village of Sujala, not by staffing the small dispensary with full-time doctors or with mass deliveries of medicines and antibiotics. Baraju focused instead on the systemic problem. It focused on impure drinking water that carried disease-causing microbes. Baraju installed a simple and effective water purification system for the village, and disease among the villagers and its manifestations plummeted. Instead of treating each villager with hard-to-obtain medicine for a range of illnesses, the water purification plant offered a systemic solution. Our next two examples also come from India. Unilever is the world's #2 household products company behind Procter & Gamble. Its Indian subsidiary, Hindustan Unilever, has shown itself to be a shrewd competitor in this developing nation of 1 billion people. It's also innovative in helping to solve endemic social problems and in building market share among the poorest segments of Indian society. Two products that Unilever has leveraged are soap and salt. First, soap. As with the example of water purification, sometimes we can identify a problem cluster around a single phenomenon or a type of behavior. In this case, Unilever had several problems to tackle. First, how can you differentiate soap? Unilever decided to market a lower-priced soap to the poorer segments of society, and do so as a health issue. In support of this marketing effort, Unilever sent teams of educators into hundreds of rural villages to teach the local population about the spread of germs that cause disease, that washing hands with soap and water could reduce the spread of disease in the villages. Unilever's other campaign was the marketing of their special brand of salt. Iodine is an element required by humans for healthy thyroid gland function, but the diets of most Indians is iodine deficient. The company discovered in the early 2000s that the processing of salt and of traditional Indian cooking methods purged up to 50% of iodine from the salt. So Unilever sought and found a more resilient type of iodine that could withstand these cooking techniques and began to market this enriched salt throughout the country. The company positioned its salt as a health enhancement. We can see that Unilever not only chose to fulfill needs of consumers in India, but did so in a way that helped to address social problems and to make available necessary products to what has commonly been called the bottom of the pyramid. This is the strata of poor people whose cumulative buying power is nonetheless a powerful, untapped source of economic development. In all three of these cases, the systemic problem affected health. But in the Best Buy case, by contrast, the systemic problem involved information. At IBM, the systemic problem was the incentives. For college students who keep losing their keys, the systemic problem is probably lack of skills. They've never learned to hang up their keys, though they might see it as a lack of resources. For example, maybe they don't have a hammer. Another possible source of systemic problems is morale. Morale is often a symptom of one of the other kinds of systemic problems we've already discussed, but sometimes it might be an underlying cause. Here is what British defense doctrine has to say. Success in war often depends more on moral than on physical qualities. Numbers, armaments, and resources cannot compensate for lack of courage, energy, determination, skill, and the bold offensive spirit that springs from a national determination to succeed. The development and subsequent maintenance of the qualities of morale are therefore essential to success in war. Good coaches also understand the importance of assessing systemic problems. Powerful strategies obtained not merely by analyzing what went wrong in just the previous game. Instead, powerful strategy depends upon looking for systemic problems that appear across multiple games. How do you know when you've identified a truly systemic problem? You can ask yourself why over and over. 5 times is a common number to get to a root cause. To take the IBM example, the chain of questions could have started like this. Why don't we commercialize any of our new technologies? Because engineers are preoccupied with current projects. Why are engineers preoccupied with short-term projects? Because that's what managers tell them to do. Why do our managers tell engineers to focus on short-term projects? Because that's how incentives are set up. A series of why questions can force you to keep going until you reach a truly systemic cause of the problem. And once you've identified a systemic problem, you can then look for creative ways to avoid the problem, just like Jeff Severts did when he created an alternative way to gather data at Best Buy. Or you can look for creative ways to simplify the problem, like Baraju Foundation did in India when it turned problems involving many diseases into a problem of water quality. Systems. Our world is a complex mesh of interconnected and interdependent systems that sometimes vex us, but which we cannot do without. Systems deliver our milk and bread. They pick up our trash and they clothe us. They shelter us. They protect us and educate us. Systems offer us tremendous advantages in achieving our goals, but sometimes systems can yield outputs that can hurt us in ways unintended. By recognizing the role of systems in our lives, we can more easily identify the root cause of problems that may seem inexplicable, intractable, and repetitive. And we can more quickly reach decisions that make sense and attack the actual dilemma. Even cursory analysis of systems, great and small, can help us improve our efficiency, sharpen our decision-making, and tackle problems in ways that ensure that they won't be visiting us again tomorrow, or next week, or even next year.